At this point, the romance genre has practically taken over my life. So I have been reading a lot of romance in the past few years, but I feel like this year, 2022, I have been reading so many more romance books. Specifically, it's been a lot of contemporary and historical romance, but for this video in particular, I really wanted to focus on my favorite contemporary romances, and we'll make a separate video about all of like my favorite historical romances, the ones that I recommend, but this one is definitely going to be specifically contemporary. So I'm really excited to share with you all 10 of my favorite contemporary romance books. These are books that I have read over the past, I want to say 3 or 4 years, and I love them all so much. And if you haven't picked up any of these books, I 100% recommend that you do as soon as possible. And if you have any recommendations for romance books that you read and enjoyed, leave them down below and I will definitely pick them up or check them out to see if I would like them as well. So let's get right on into the video. The first book that I absolutely loved in this list, this is going completely like not in order, it's not from like favorite to least favorite, it's just like they're all my favorites. But the first one on this stack is definitely Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. This is a really fun, really fandom-centered romance book. And that's something that I really loved about this book in particular, is that it focuses so much on fandom and so much on like fan fiction. And at the center, there's this kind of like very popular Greek mythology inspired series, and I think that that's so much fun. It definitely gives off the vibes of like Game of Thrones. And basically this book is about Marcus and April. Marcus is this very famous lead actor on a series that's kind of like Greek mythology inspired, but his little secret is that he really loves fan fiction. And then you also have April, and she is just kind of like this normal person, and she has a secret that she is a really popular and famous fan fiction author. And little do either Marcus or April know, but they actually have spoken to each other, and Marcus has actually read April's fan fiction, but they don't actually know each other or their names in real life. So when April goes semi-viral in this cosplay that she did for one of the characters in the series, and she ends up getting a lot of like hate comments from really fatphobic people, Marcus ends up coming to her defense and offers her a date. And so they end up going on this date, they really connect, and things just go from there, and I absolutely adored this book. Unfortunately, I didn't love the sequel quite as much. This book is part of like a series that connects, but it's not necessarily following the same couple throughout each book. I didn't necessarily connect to the second book as much as I did with this first one. I think I had really high expectations for the second book, and I was really excited when I first started it, but as the book dragged on, it just felt like it was going really slow and nothing was really happening. But with this book, I felt like things were happening all the time. I really loved the pacing of this book. I thought the characters were really interesting, and I think the fact that this one centers more around fan fiction than the second book does, I think that really helped a lot, because I enjoyed reading the little fan fiction-y bits. I enjoyed reading sort of like the comments or emails that they sent back and forth to each other, and I liked that there was this secret between them. So I felt like it made the book a lot more engaging compared to the second book, where there wasn't really that sense of secrecy. And yeah, I definitely preferred this book compared to the second one. So, I mean, a lot of people love the second book, so I don't want to dissuade anybody from reading it, but definitely pick up this first one. The second book is one that I have read really recently. Like, I literally finished it, I think like a week ago, maybe a few days ago, and that is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. This book went so fast. Like, I have not read a physical book this fast in so long. And as you can tell by the cover, this is a sapphic adult contemporary romance. It's by Ashley Herring Blake, and she is typically a YA author. I believe that this is her first adult romance book, and it was fantastic. It was flawless. It was amazing. I just fell in love with this book, and I cannot wait for the sequel. It's similar to Spoiler Alert, where it's a series, but it's following different couples throughout each book. So I'm really excited for the second one already. Like, I need to get my hands on it as soon as possible. But this book is basically, at least in my mind, it's kind of like a Cinderella retelling in a way. It has sort of that vibe to it because you have Delilah Green, she's the main character, and she is kind of like this orphan. She has a stepmother and a stepsister, and she doesn't really get along with either one of them. And both her mom and her dad have passed away, so that's kind of where we are meeting her at this moment, is that she has been away from her hometown and her step family for a very long time. She's been living in New York, being an artist and a waitress. She is having to come back for her stepsister's wedding because she has been hired to be the photographer. So you kind of get that Cinderella-esque vibe, but then she ends up re-meeting her stepsister's friend, and they have a very obvious attraction to each other. And of course this is really complicated because Delilah doesn't have a very good relationship with her stepsister, and she never really got along very well with any of her stepsister's friends. So there's a lot of complications going on here. And then you also have Claire, who is the stepsister's friend, and she is a single mother. She has a daughter who I think is about 11 years old, and she's really looking for kind of a rebound situation to get her mind off of her complicated relationship with her daughter's father. And yeah, I really loved this book. I loved the small town setting. It felt like really real. I felt like I was there. And something that I really loved about this book is that I felt like every single character and every single scenario in this book was like 100% necessary. Nothing felt frivolous, and nothing felt like you could like take it out and the story would be fine. Every single part of this was so necessary, and I feel like sometimes in romance novels, specifically contemporary ones, I think this also kind of happens a little bit in historical fiction as well. Sometimes you can have like filler scenes throughout the book where it doesn't necessarily feel like we needed that scene. But I feel like with this book there were so many scenes and they all had such a big purpose. So I really enjoyed this book. I highly recommend it, especially if you're looking for a sapphic romance. The next book is a more obvious Cinderella retelling, and that is If the Shoe Fits by Julie Murphy. This is part of the Meant to Be series that Disney is currently doing, where they're having these various authors take Disney, I guess, fairy tales. I don't know if they're just going to be doing like the princess movies, but they're taking like the princess stories and making them into these contemporary romance retellings. And I love that they're all like adult romances. The one thing that I will say is that if you're going to go into this, this is absolutely not spicy at all. There is no mention of like sex or like an actual sex scene. So if you're looking for that, these might not be the books for you, but I personally love these so much. And this book follows our protagonist, Cindy, and she is obviously plus size, and she really loves fashion, but she specifically loves shoes. And she just got her fashion degree. She doesn't have a job lined up, and so her stepmother, who is producing this sort of bachelor-esque kind of show, she ends up deciding that she is going to put Cindy in the show as one of the contestants, and she is vying for the affection of the main male lead. And I absolutely love this book. It had such a great, fun, fluffy kind of vibe, and I think the thing that I love the most about this book is like Delilah Green Doesn't Care kind of does the Cinderella retelling where you have kind of like the evil stepmother, the evil stepsister. It's a bit more complicated in that book. It's not necessarily like so black and white as any normal Cinderella retelling is. But with If the Shoe Fits, you don't have that kind of trope of the evil stepmother, evil stepsisters. I really love how positive and healthy this step family is. I love that the stepmother is so supportive. She really believes in Cindy, and then you have these two stepsisters who are also super supportive and love her as a sister, and I felt like that was so refreshing. I would love to see more Cinderella retellings kind of do a bit of a twist on the normal evil stepmother, evil stepsisters kind of trope. So yeah, I really love this one. And then in the same series, you also have By the Book by Jasmine Guillory, and I absolutely loved this book so much. And obviously one of like the reasons that I love this book so much is that it's set in my hometown, and that was just so fun and fresh for me. I really haven't read very many books that are set in Santa Barbara. I have read quite a few books that like mention Santa Barbara, but none that are actually set there, so it was so much fun to kind of like pick it apart a little bit and be like, that's accurate or that's not accurate. And I just had a lot of fun with this book. And this one is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, which I absolutely adored. Beauty and the Beast retellings can kind of be hit or miss for me. I tend to really like Cinderella retellings, but Beauty and the Beast is a bit harder for authors to adapt for some reason or just retell. And this one actually did it so well, and I loved it. Basically, you have the main character and she is working in publishing. She is trying to get her author, her celebrity author, to write this book, and he is not responding to emails. Her boss just kind of keeps telling her continue to email him every week or every 2 weeks or whatever, and you know, just try to keep up with him, and nothing is working. So she ends up flying all the way to California, all the way to Santa Barbara, and she has to kind of like knock on his door and be like, hey, I'm here, let's get this book done. And he is not having it. He is not excited about this. This is not something that he really wants to do, but he sort of reluctantly lets her stay. And he has this like huge mansion, and I think something that I loved about this one, I think something that might have worked for me a little bit, is that like you can't necessarily like kidnap somebody and just like keep them in your house without letting them out, you know, similarly to the actual Beauty and the Beast story. But thankfully Jasmine Guillory didn't go that direction. She was like, okay, we're not gonna have this main character be a prison in this house, in this like mansion. She gets to leave the mansion every once in a while, so I really liked that about the book as well. And I also just really liked the progression of this relationship. It felt supernatural. It felt really natural. It didn't feel supernatural, that's not at all what I mean, but it did feel very, you know, just realistic. And I feel like sometimes I worry with these like fairy tale retellings because, you know, when you try to adapt a fairy tale for a contemporary setting, it can feel a little fantastical. And I think this definitely had its moments of feeling that way, but with the relationship itself, it definitely felt very natural. So I really liked that, and I felt like these two main characters had a lot of chemistry and they worked really well. They had this really great banter between each other. And yeah, overall I really enjoyed this book, and it was so nice and fun and fluffy to read. I have already started to read some more from Jasmine Guillory. I actually started The Proposal a few days ago, and I'm really loving that one as well. So I might be reading a lot of Jasmine Guillory in you know, the coming months, so I'm really glad that I found an author that I really enjoy. The next book is from another author that I really enjoy, and that is Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbard. And I feel like I can't mention this book without mentioning her other books in the series. You have this book, obviously, and then you have Take a Hint, Dani Brown, and then you have Act Your Age, Eve Brown. I gave all 3 books 5 stars. I loved them so much, and for like their own very unique reasons. This is the first book, obviously, that I picked up from the series. It's the first one, you know, I wanted to go in order, and I absolutely adored this book so much. And it had such like a good way of representing chronic illness in a way that felt like very realistic, but not necessarily depressing in a way. You know, it didn't really feel very negative of a portrayal. It was definitely more positive, but also without sugarcoating it, which I really appreciated. I absolutely adored this book. I loved the connection between the 2 main characters. I loved their chemistry together. Basically, this is obviously about Chloe Brown, and she deals with chronic illness, and one day she decides that she kind of wants to make this bucket list of things that she wants to do, in order to obviously get a life. And she ends up sharing this list with the handyman that works around her apartment complex, and his name is Red, and they have kind of had a very complicated relationship in the past. They haven't always gotten along, but he decides that he wants to help her with this get a life list. And it's just so much fun. I had a blast reading it. I think I would love to listen to the audiobook for this one, because I did the audiobooks for the other two books, but this one I read physically, and while I loved it physically, I think that I'd really enjoy it as an audiobook. And then you have Take a Hint, Dani Brown. I just want to mention that really quickly. Love that book. And then I think actually my favorite, I don't own it physically, so I didn't want to put it on this list, but I guess I kind of have to mention it as well. Act Your Age, Eve Brown is like my favorite from the series. I absolutely loved it. I read it in literally one night. I finished Take a Hint, Dani Brown, and then literally right after that I started Act Your Age, Eve Brown. I think it might have been at like 7 o'clock at night or something like that, and I did not go to sleep until I finished it. It was that good. I was obsessed. I was blown away. I could really relate to Eve. I could really relate to her love interest. I just absolutely loved it, and that one has autistic representation, which is awesome. And yeah, I just really love that book, so I had to mention it. I know these aren't technically in order, but I have to mention this book being one of my favorite books on this list, and that is Beach Read by Emily Henry. I have read, I think, all of Emily Henry's romance novels now, right? I think so. And this one is definitely still my favorite. This one broke me. I'm definitely going to reread it this summer because it is such a perfect summer read for me. It's so Folklore by Taylor Swift. It's so Cardigan. You know, it's just like all of the songs of Folklore. It's Beach Read. It's Beach Read. And I love that the cover and the title are so deceiving. I feel like it just works for the vibe of Emily Henry's kind of brand of romance novel. And I just love it. I love this book so much. I can't even explain it to you. Basically, this is about January, and she is a romance author, but she has kind of gotten into a little bit of a slump because of some family drama. So she ends up going to the beach house that her father left for her, and is kind of trying to figure out what she should do with her life, how she should go about writing this next romance novel. And then you also have Gus, and he is also a writer, but he writes more literary fiction novels, and they used to go to college together. They were kind of like college rivals, and they end up re-meeting each other in this little beach town. His beach house is literally right next door to her dad's, and they kind of come up with this agreement where they are going to attempt to write each other's genre, and they have to come up with these sort of dates where they are indicative of each other's genres or their own genres. And I absolutely loved this book. It tore me apart. I cried so hard. Like, I cried to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue pretty hard, but this one might have been like a rival to that book because this book made me sob violently. I loved this book, and I cannot wait to reread it this year. I feel like this might be like a book that I reread every summer. It's just that good of a book. And if you read any of the books on this list, read this one if you haven't yet. It is so good, amazing, iconic. And obviously Emily Henry's other books are also very good. There's People We Meet on Vacation. That one was pretty good. I didn't love it nearly as much as Beach Read, but I did really enjoy it. And then there's also Book Lovers that just came out. I read an arc of it. It was absolutely fantastic. Still didn't love it quite as much as Beach Read, but I mean, it's really hard to reach like my level of enjoyment of Beach Read. I almost think it's impossible. I can't imagine any romance book ever topping this one. This is the one for me. And then the last few books are kind of ones that are oldies but goodies. Like, I read these books back in 2018, 2019, so a few years ago, not necessarily like old school or anything, but they're definitely not as new as a lot of these other books are. The first one I want to mention is The Bride Test by Helen Huang. I read this book I think back in 2019 or 2018, 2019. And I really loved it. I really need to read more Helen Huang books. I know that there's The Heart Principle. Like, I keep getting that book pushed to me by different audiobook apps. Like, it's always one of the first books on like the homepage or whatever, and I really need to read that book. It looks so good. Like, I love the cover. I've heard some pretty great things about it. I did hear that it's like a little sad, but I like my romance books a little sad. Like, I need my romance books to make me cry and then pick me right back up. So I'm hoping that that book is also just as good as The Bride Test was. And I really love The Bride Test because of its autistic representation. Really appreciated that, similarly to Actor Age Eve Brown, so I love those books for that reason. And yeah, I just really felt like that book was super fun and engaging. Like, I remember reading that book so fast as an audiobook. I just had so much fun. It's been such a long time, so it's kind of hard to remember like my specific feelings about this book, but I just know that I absolutely loved it. And there were so many little scenes that have stuck with me even to this day. I really need to read more from Helen Huang because I know that her books are super hyped, and I know for good reason. So definitely need to read her books. So let me know if there's one that I should read next, if it should be The Heart Principle or something else, because I really want to know, and I'm sure that I have a lot of people who have read her books and loved them. The next book, it was pretty hard to decide which one I wanted to talk about because Christina Lauren has so many, or has so many. I don't know. They're two people, so it's kind of hard to decide which ones to use, but they have so many books that I have absolutely loved. And I think the one that really stands out to me, it's really hard because I feel like there's two that really stand out to me, because one of them is Roomies and the other one is The Unhoneymooners. I loved both of those books pretty equally, and I can't really decide which one I like more. I did choose to include Roomies instead of The Unhoneymooners, but I'm not really sure if I agree with that decision now. But I was rereading my review for Roomies and I'm like, oh yeah, that's why I really loved it. I could really relate to the main character. I think, you know, at the time when I was reading that book, I was really going through some of the same things that she was also going through, where she was at her job and she didn't necessarily hate her job, but she also wasn't like super passionate about it either. And that was definitely something that I was going through back in like 2018, 2019 when I read this book. And so I felt like I could really connect to the main character. And I also loved that this one kind of had a lot of Broadway influence to it. There's a lot of like love for musicals, and I am a musical girly. I love musicals, so this one definitely spoke to me. But I also love The Unhoneymooners because that's kind of like an enemies to lovers romance. It's a lot of fun. It has definitely stuck with me in comparison to some of their other books that I also loved but like didn't love nearly as much as these two, so it was really hard to choose between them. I think I have to go with Roomies though compared to The Unhoneymooners, because while I love The Unhoneymooners, I didn't necessarily relate to any of the characters, but with Roomies I definitely related. So for me that tends to matter a little bit more. And the last one that I want to talk about is totally another throwback, and that is The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. This was one of like the very first adult romances that I like really read. I don't know if that makes any sense. I feel like sometimes I would read like a random adult romance and I wasn't necessarily like going out of my way to read them. This one I definitely went out of my way to read, and I absolutely loved it. It was so good. It's a book that still sticks with me to this day. Like, I cannot buy soy milk at the store without thinking of this book because she goes to Alaska and she has like such a hard time finding like any non-dairy milk, and I think the only one that she can find is soy milk, and it's like $12 or something like that. And so I think about that every single time I go to buy soy milk because that's my preferred non-dairy milk. So yeah, it's definitely stuck with me in that way, and this is another main character that I can relate to a lot in a few different ways. She's like, I think 24, 25. She doesn't know how to drive. She lives with her parents. She has this like job that she's not like super passionate about, which I think, you know, I relate to all those kind of characters that have like those similar kind of tropes. And thankfully in romance and a lot of adult contemporary, there are a lot of those kind of characters. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. This definitely made me excited about adult romance when I first read it. And I haven't read any other K.A. Tucker books. I do have her adult fantasy romance, I believe, right? I have that. I think it's called A Fate of Wrath and Flame, I believe. A Fate of Wrath and Flame. I do have that book, but I haven't read it yet, so I definitely need to catch up on my K.A. Tucker books, because obviously I love The Simple Wild. I highly recommend it, and I'm pretty sure I would like all of her other books as well. Those were a lot of romance recommendations and favorites. Like, I thought that, oh, it'd be so easy to talk about my 10 favorite romance books, but oh my gosh, I talked forever. I absolutely love adult romance. It is so much fun. I always am so happy whenever I start one, even if I like don't necessarily love it that much. There have definitely been a few that I do not like, but even those ones I do have a really great time reading them. So it's probably one of my new favorite genres, surprisingly. I think that it's definitely I don't know if I want to say that it's outdone my love for YA fantasy or just fantasy in general, but I don't know, adult romance kind of is in the running, you know, it's really up there. So if you have any recommendations for other adult romance books that I didn't mention that you would want me to read, let me know down below in the comments. And if you made it this far into the video, leave any color heart that you want in the comments. I think that'd be a great idea. And if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, Storygraph. All the links are going to be down below in the description, along with a bunch of other stuff. And I will see you all in my next video. Bye! Ooh, I thought it'd be me and you. Oh.